I landed in Vietnam in August of 1968 and was sent to Firebase Razer soon after that. They dropped us in late in the afternoon, one helicopter at a time, because the landing area wasn't big enough for more than one bird to sit down safely. From the air, it looked like a bare patch scratched out of the ridge, and once I stepped off, I realized that was pretty much what it was. Red dirt, low bunkers, wire that had been repaired a lot of times, and artillery pits dug into the slope. The place sat on a narrow rise with jungle close on 3 sides and open ground falling away on the 4th. You could see why it was there, and you could also see why nobody expected it to stay quiet forever. Razer had been taking occasional fire before we got there, mostly at night, and everyone talked about it so casually. We would stand watch in pairs, and I remember the nights were pitch black. The days settled into work details. We filled a lot of sandbags, repaired the wire, and were always digging everything a little deeper than it already was. The artillery crews fired missions most of the time, and sometimes we could hear distant firing back, but it never reached us. And then on the 4th day after I arrived, everything changed. Real fire started coming in about mid-morning. Mortars came in, walking across the center of the base and hitting near the gun pits. It was loud and chaotic. That was the first time I saw Razer really wake up. Men scrambled for cover, and the artillery crews stayed with their guns and kept firing out. The mortar rounds came in for maybe 15 minutes and then stopped just as suddenly as they began. We had one man wounded from fragments in his leg. The medic worked on him in the bunker, and a helicopter came in later that afternoon and lifted him out. The next day, we doubled the work on the wire and cleared more brush along the slope. We moved extra ammunition to the bunkers and stacked water where it could be reached quickly. Nobody said siege, but everyone was preparing for one, and 2 nights later, it began for real. The first real night started just after dark. A few minutes later, the first mortar round landed beyond the wire and then another closer in. After that, they began dropping steadily across the base. We were already in bunkers when it started, so the first minute was mostly counting impacts and waiting for the direction to settle. Then rifles opened up from the eastern tree line and the firing spread along the perimeter. And that was how the siege began. The artillery crews kept working their guns even while incoming rounds landed around them. You could feel the concussions in your chest. We fired toward muzzle flashes and movement whenever we could see it, but most of the time it was just firing into the dark. The fighting lasted most of the night. By morning, the ground inside the perimeter looked different. Sandbags torn open, splinters everywhere, and the red dirt darker where explosions had churned it up. We counted 1 man dead near the western sector where the fire had been closest. He had been hit during a rush toward the wire sometime before dawn. The helicopters tried to come in mid-morning. The first one circled and took fire and pulled off. The second made it down long enough to load the wounded and the body and then lifted out again. They dropped ammo crates and water as they left, and most of it landed where it needed to. The rest of that day was quieter, but nobody relaxed. We repaired bunkers, filled more sandbags, and cleared fields of fire that had been damaged during the night. Every man slept a little when he could because we all expected the next attack after dark. It came earlier than expected. Late afternoon firing began again from the south and built quickly into automatic weapons and rockets. This time they tried to move closer before nightfall. We could see movement along the slope, and the machine guns opened up along that side. The artillery fired defensive missions almost continuously for over an hour. They didn't break through, but they stayed close until full dark, and then pulled back. We lost another man that evening when a rocket hit near the gun pit. Several more were wounded, mostly fragments and concussions. By the third morning, the base already felt older than when I had arrived. The helicopters came in late morning. This time, they stayed only seconds on the ground. The wounded went out first, and then water and ammunition came off the skids as fast as it could be pushed. The sixth day stayed quiet through most of the morning, but nobody wandered far from cover. Helicopters finally came in near midday. They stayed just long enough to take out 2 of the more serious wounded and drop more water and ammunition. The last attack came in the late afternoon. Mortars came in heavy, striking along almost the entire perimeter. Within seconds, rifle and machine gun fire followed from 3 sides. This time they came closer under the cover of it and stayed close. I was in a bunker along the western side when a round hit the sandbags near the opening and fragments came through. Something struck my left hand hard enough to spin me sideways. I thought at first it was a direct hit, but when I looked down, it was shrapnel across the back of the hand and knuckles. It bled fast, but the fingers still moved. I wrapped it with a field dressing and stayed where I was. I wasn't leaving this cover unless I had to. The firing stayed heavy, and they pressed closer than any of the other nights. We could hear movement just beyond the wire and see shapes between flashes. Grenades came in again, and one landed near the trench line but didn't go off. Nobody went near it until morning. Artillery fired danger close for a long stretch, and the ground shook enough that dirt fell from the bunker roof. After a while, the incoming slowed, and the movement outside pulled back. The shooting didn't stop completely, but it broke apart into scattered fire again. And then just before daylight, it ended. We stayed in position until full light because nobody trusted it to be over. When the sun came up, the slope beyond the wire was quiet and empty of movement. No firing came from the tree line. The siege had lasted 6 days. We had 4 men killed and several wounded, including me. My hand worked well enough once it was cleaned and wrapped properly. The helicopters came back mid-morning and lifted me out with the other wounded and the dead. I had 2 surgeries on my hand and was discharged and home by March of '69. My entire Vietnam War was spent defending Firebase Razer for 6 days. But that was more than enough for me.